Gender equality in Islam, myth or reality? Today, we're exploring a question that often sparks debate. Is gender equality in Islam a myth or a reality? By using AI, we aim to approach this question logically, removing any emotional or cultural bias to examine what Islamic teachings actually say about gender equality. If you find value in this kind of unbiased analysis, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more discussions. To explore this, we'll examine key areas where the Quran and Hadith discuss gender equality, including spirituality, education, economic rights, marriage, legal testimony, and social participation. Using deductive and inductive reasoning, we'll analyze whether Islam upholds gender equality in principle and practice. Spiritual equality in Islam. The Quran emphasizes spiritual equality between men and women. Surah An-Nisa 4 states, "O mankind, fear your Lord, who created you from one soul and created from it its mate." This indicates shared origins and equality in spiritual essence. Further, Surah Al-Ahzab 33-35 specifically mentions both men and women in acts of worship and moral virtues, affirming equal rewards for their actions. Deductively, we can conclude that Islam views men and women as equal in terms of spiritual worth. If Islam were fundamentally biased, we would expect to see different spiritual expectations or rewards. Instead, both are accountable to God and are equally rewarded, supporting the idea of spiritual equality. Inductively, this emphasis on spiritual equality suggests a broader commitment to fairness, indicating that Islam's teachings promote justice and equality at a fundamental level. Right to education. Islam emphasizes the pursuit of knowledge for both genders. The Prophet Muhammad said, "Seeking knowledge is an obligation upon every Muslim," which scholars interpret as inclusive of both men and women. In early Islamic society, women like Aisha, the Prophet's wife, were highly respected scholars and intellectuals, contributing to the fields of Hadith and Islamic jurisprudence. Deductively, it's clear that Islam values education for both men and women. If learning were solely for men, we wouldn't see influential women in early Islamic history. Islamic teachings do not restrict education by gender, reinforcing that knowledge is a right and responsibility for everyone. Inductively, this emphasis on education aligns with gender equality in intellectual pursuits, suggesting that Islam encourages both men and women to develop intellectually. Economic rights, ownership, and financial independence. Islam grants women the right to own property, earn income, and maintain financial independence. Surah An-Nisa 4:32 says, "For men is a share of what they have earned, and for women is a share of what they have earned." In addition, Islamic law ensures that a woman's assets remain solely hers, with no claim from her husband over her earnings. Deductively, if Islam intended women to be financially dependent, we would expect restrictions on their financial rights. However, the Quran explicitly upholds women's financial autonomy, demonstrating a level of economic equality. Inductively, this financial independence reflects that Islam values women's agency in economic matters. While cultural practices may vary, the Quran provides a clear foundation for financial equality. Marriage, consent, and respect. Marriage in Islam is based on mutual consent and respect. Surah An-Nisa 14 states, "O you who have believed, it is not lawful for you to inherit women by compulsion." This verse challenges practices from pre-Islamic Arabia, where women were often treated as property. Islam's emphasis on mutual consent highlights a woman's right to choose her spouse. Deductively, if Islam viewed women as inferior, marriage would likely be transactional rather than a partnership. The focus on mutual respect and consent indicates that Islam values marriage as an equitable relationship. Inductively, the Quran's opposition to forced marriage supports the notion of gender equality within marriage. While cultural practices may sometimes deviate, the Quran promotes respect and fairness between spouses. Legal testimony and inheritance. Some verses in the Quran address differences in inheritance and legal testimony. Surah Al-Baqarah 2:282 states that 2 female witnesses are equivalent to 1 male witness in financial matters, and inheritance rules in Surah An-Nisa dictate that daughters generally receive half the share of sons. Deductively, these differences may suggest inequality if viewed without historical context. However, these rulings were introduced in a society where men were the primary financial providers. The purpose of these laws was to establish economic stability and protection, balancing responsibility within the family. Inductively, these rulings were progressive for their time, granting women inheritance rights in a context where they previously had none. Today, many scholars argue that these rulings should be re-examined as women now contribute to family finances, calling for an interpretation that aligns with current social contexts. Social and political roles. Throughout Islamic history, women have held significant social and political roles. Khadijah, the Prophet's first wife, was a successful businesswoman, and Aisha contributed extensively to Islamic scholarship and political life. Female companions of the Prophet also participated in social, educational, and even military affairs. Deductively, if Islam discouraged women's societal involvement, we would not see such examples of prominent women in early Islamic society. The fact that these women held influential roles suggests that Islam values women's societal contributions. Inductively, the presence of respected women in Islamic history indicates that Islam supports women's active roles in society. While cultural restrictions exist in some regions, foundational texts and historical precedents support women's involvement. Conclusion: gender equality in Islam, myth or reality? In conclusion, Islamic teachings affirm principles of equality in spirituality, education, and economic rights. Deductively, it is clear that the Quran and Hadith do not support the oppression or marginalization of women. While some rulings on inheritance and testimony may appear unequal, they were contextually progressive and aimed at balancing responsibilities in a specific historical period. Inductively, the Quran's support for women's rights in areas like education, financial independence, and social participation suggests a strong foundation for gender equality in Islam. While cultural interpretations vary, the core teachings uphold dignity and respect for women. Whether gender equality in Islam is a myth or reality depends on how we interpret these teachings today. The Quran provides a framework for justice and fairness, which allows room for re-evaluation in evolving social contexts. If you found this exploration enlightening, please like, share, and subscribe for more analyses. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to diving into more thought-provoking questions with you in our next video.